surrender my life. I'm in on you. I'm in on you. Where you love and my sin was white. I want you. I want you. I want you. I want you. Jesus. Savior of the world. Your love and reign. Your love and reign. Blessed be your name, which brings the abundance. Blessed be your name. Blessed be your name, in the fires in the desert place, and the walk through the wilderness. Blessed be your name. When the darkness closes in, Lord, still I will say, blessed be the name of the Lord. Blessed be your name. Blessed be the name of the Lord. Blessed be your glorious name. You give and take away. Give and take away. My heart will choose. Your blessed be your name. Every blessing you pour out, turn back to praise. When the darkness closes in, Lord, still I will say, blessed be the name of the Lord. Blessed be your name. Blessed be the name of the Lord. Blessed be your glorious name. The name of the Lord. Oh, blessed be your name. Blessed be the name of the Lord. Blessed be your glorious name. You give and take away. You give and take away. My heart is to say, your blessed be your name. say how great, how great is our God. For the name above all names, you are worthy of all praise. And my heart will sing, how great is our God. And above all names, to the name above all names, you are worthy of all praise. And my heart will sing, how great is our God. How great, how great is our God. Sing it, how great is our God. Oh, sing how great. How great is our God? How great, how great is our God? Sing with me, how great is our God? Oh, sing how great, how great. Our God sings my soul, my Savior God, to thee. How great thou art. How great thou art. Then sings my soul, my Savior God, to thee. How great thou art, how great thou art. Here I stand before you now, as honest as I know how. I'm broken by the things gone by. Spirit, help my soul to rise. I try my best, but still I fail. And even then, you're with me there. You remind me I'm a child of God, regardless of the things I've done. All my hope is found in perfect love. Your mercy triumphs over judgment. Love wider than horizon, stronger than all sin. to the heart of God. Your heart, oh God, is all I want. Well, they say that it's impossible to ever save a sinner's soul. But my God says to the prodigal, my beloved son, you're welcome home. Your mercy triumphs over judgment. Love wider than horizons, stronger than ocean. Lord, your kindness leads us to repentance, to the heart of God. Your heart, oh God, is all I want. All to Jesus I surrender. All to Him I freely give. I will ever love and trust Him. In His presence daily live. All to Jesus I surrender. All to Him I freely give. I will ever love and trust Him. In His presence daily live. Oh, your mercy triumphs over judgment. Love wider than horizon, stronger than ocean. Lord, your kindness leads us to repentance, to the heart of God. Your heart, oh God, is all I want.
Our struggle is not against flesh and blood. It's against the powers of this dark world. Therefore, put on the full armor of God, so you can stand your ground. Stand your
I got my war clothes on. In the army of the Lord. I got my war clothes on. In the army. I got my war clothes on. In the army of the Lord. I got my war clothes clothes on. In the army, I'm a soldier. In the army, and the body of a soldier. In the army, I'm a soldier. In the army, I'm a body of a soldier. In the army, I got my breastplate on. In the army, I got my helmet on. In the army, I got my sword and shield. In the army, His truth is marching on. Bring it on. I'm a soldier. In the army, 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 I'm a soldier. Come on now, left, 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 left. I'm in the Lord's army. I'm in the Lord's.
Well, praise the Lord. Good morning, everyone. And guess what? Once again, you are tuned to the Tib Gospel Network. And I'm Brother Ed. I'll be your host for the next hour or so in this Bible study as we continue to study the book of Judges. And we're finding some interesting things that are happening in the book of Judges. And the Jews have got themselves in quite a mess right now after bombarding the tribe of Benjamin. And now there has to be a reconciliation to the tribe of Benjamin. Now, I'm not Stephen Ben-Nun, but I can read what the book says. And ladies and gentlemen, somebody's going to have to do something, or there won't be 12 tribes. And with that being said, we're going to discover today exactly what that is. Have you ever had to do something that you knew was wrong? Have you ever had to do something that you didn't want to do because of what the past said about it? Well, the answer, of course, to that is yes. We all cross that bridge one way or another. And today is no different as we watch the Israelites take care of a problem that they themselves inflicted on themselves. And so now they're going to have to figure out what to do about it. And we will now find out in this next chapter what's going to happen in this 21st chapter of the book of Judges. All right. Well, it's good to have you. Let's see who we got. Wow, Brother Gary, you're holding up the whole thing. You got some strong shoulders there, brother. Because you're it, as far as I can see. As far as the eye as in me can see. Oh, someone else just showed up. Good morning. Good morning to you. All right. So let's go to the 21st chapter and see what we can see And in the first 23 verses, it's going to be the tribes of Israel and the Lord's counsel, and the fact that the tribes obediently battled Benjamin, yet they later grieved at the void caused by Benjamin's near obliteration. So this section details their ill-conceived plan to preserve the tribe, apparently without divine counsel. Mistake after mistake. So when God's people make a habit of following or failing to consult the Lord, guess what? They end up confused about right and wrong, wisdom and foolishness. So with that being said, let's hit verse number 1. Now when the men of Israel had sworn in Mizpah, saying, there shall not any of us give his daughter unto Benjamin to wife. So they were in Mizpah, and they swore, which means the Israelites made an oath not to give their daughters to the 600 surviving Benjamites, but they realized that the latter would fade as a tribe unless they had some wives. So since the Benjamite women died in the total sack of Gibeah, they needed to fix it. Because only 600 males were left to Benjamin from the previous warfare, and because the other tribes had sworn not to allow their daughters to marry a Benjamite. And so the tribe faced possible extinction. The immoral solutions to the problem demonstrate the closing observation of the book and the following narratives concerning Ruth and Samuel, both set in the period of the Judges, right? So, from a welcome contrast to the widespread conditions of increasing national degeneracy in the era of Judges, whatever God and His Word are, they're not honored. The degenerate spiritual and moral standards seem to debase social conditions and disorder civil authority that pictured in these closing chapters are likely the result, a portrait often drawn by the Old Testament prophets. And so it appears that the men of Israel had taken oaths when they met at Mizpah, and they were so revolted by the terrible crime in the men of Gibeah that they had committed, and they refused to let their daughters marry men of Benjamin. And remember now, this all started from the Belial brothers, okay? Over a tremendous abomination of God, in that the men of the Belial brothers came as sodomites and homosexuals to take the Levite to be their little friend. Remember? And this is what happens when you let sin reign like this. So they undoubtedly took an oath also that anyone who did not come against this terrible sin that we're speaking of by fighting against the Benjamites would be killed. So this was to show their total disgust of the sin, right? But the fact is, they're just too successful because they've practically wiped out the tribe of Benjamin right here. Verse number 2 says, and the people came to the house of God and abode there till the evening before God, and lifted up their voices and wept sore. Right? Not to the city of Bethel, as some other versions say, but to Shiloh, because that's where the tabernacle and the ark were. And this is to be understood of the army after they had utterly destroyed the Benjamites. So we read of the camp in Shiloh. Here they came not so much to rejoice and to be glad and to return thanks for the victory they had at last obtained, but as to lament the unhappy case of the tribe of Benjamin, and to have counsel and advice and consider ways and means to repair their loss. And so they were fasting and praying instead of feasting and rejoicing. Not so much or that, at least not only for the 40,000 Israelites that were slain, but for the tribe of Benjamin, in danger of being lost, that we will see in the next verse. So this is speaking of the Israelites who were very sad about the destruction of the tribe of Benjamin. And they were one of the 12 tribes. So their grief was for the fact that one of their own had gone bad. It was also grief that the tribe of Benjamin may not survive. Verse 3. And here's what they said. O Lord, God of Israel, why is this come to pass in Israel, that there should be today one tribe lacking in Israel? That's what they were crying. Why should there be one tribe lacking? Now, Jehovah, He's the only living and true God, and the being of beings, eternal, immutable, omnipotent, and omnipresent, the God of all Israel, of the 12 tribes of Israel, their covenant God and Father, who has sworn favor to them in such a peculiar and gracious manner, as he had not other nations, and therefore hoped he would still have a kind of regard and suffer them to work with him in the following manner. Why is this come to pass in Israel is the cry, expressing, as some think, a concern for the 40,000 men of Israel, which fell in the first two battles, but it manifestly refers to the case we shall see next. That there should be today one tribe lacking in Israel. Okay, this means of the tribe of Benjamin, which was all but destroyed, excepting 600 men, and these had no wives to propagate the tribe. And so, unless some provision could be made, it must in a short time be totally extinct, for which they expressed great concern, not being their intention when they made the above oath to destroy them. But such as now the circumstances of things in providence, that it must perish unless some way could be found to relieve it, and which their oath seemed to preclude, and this threw them into a great perplexity. Verse 4. And so it came to pass on the morrow, the next day, that the people rose early and built an altar and offered burnt offerings and peace offerings. So here we see the day after fasting and prayer, and a sense of their present case and circumstances being deeply impressed upon their minds, they rose early in the morning to acts of devotion and exercises of religion, hoping that being in the way of their duty, the difficulties with which they were perplexed would suddenly be removed. And so they built an altar. Now, if this place is Bethel, there Jacob had built an altar, but that in such a course of years might have been demolished. And if it was Shiloh, there was the tabernacle, and so the altar of the Lord was there. So this either signifies the repairing of that altar being in ruins, which is not likely since it was built lately and used, or the building of a new one, which to do in the tabernacle was not unlawful, especially when the number of sacrifices required, which it is highly probable was the case now, as it was at the dedication of the temple. Reference 1 Kings chapter 8, verse 64. Though the above mentioned speaker thinks that building an altar signifies, as in many places, only seeking the Lord, but the use for which it was built is expressed. And they offered burnt offerings and a peace offering. These were both to atone for the sins they had been guilty of in the prosecution of the war, and to return thanks for victory given, and to implore fresh favors to be bestowed. So this is the same thing they'd done before the last battle. And they're thankful the war is finally over. And this terrible sin has been removed from the people. But they're sad for the loss of the tribe of Benjamin. Verse 5, and the children of Israel said, who is there among all the tribes of Israel that came not up with the congregation unto the Lord? For they had made a great oath concerning him that came not up to the Lord to Mizpah, saying, he shall surely be put to death. Right? So one to another, after they'd offered the sacrifices, and while they were yet together in Shiloh, who is there among all the tribes of Israel? So when they were summoned to come to Mizpah to consult together about the affair of the Levite's concubine, as appears by the next part of the verse, because they made a great oath. So in a very awful and solemn manner, with a curse annexed to it, as that about not giving a wife to Benjamin. So he shall surely be put. Now this was sent along with the summons in order to quicken their attention to them. So it appears that this is an idea for furnishing wives to the 600 men of the tribe of Benjamin that hid out. They had sworn at Mizpah that they would die if they did not go to this battle against the terrible evil. Verse 6 says, and the children of Israel repented them for Benjamin their brother, and said, there is one tribe cut off from Israel this day. Not that they went to war with them as if their curse was not good, but for the severity they had exercised toward them, especially in destroying their women and children, and for the fatal consequences like to follow hereafter, particularly the dissolution of the whole tribe. And it said that there's one tribe cut off from Israel this day, and that is, there is a likelihood or a great danger of it. It seems in the destruction of the cities of Benjamin, they had killed all the women and children, well as the men. They would like to find wives for the 600 men to start the tribe of Benjamin again. Verse 7. How shall we do for wives for them that remain, seeing we have sworn by the Lord that we will not give them of our daughters to wives? By which it seems, as well as by what is after related, that they knew of the 600 men hid in the rock of Rimmon, right? And this oath was a sacred thing, and to be kept inviolable even to their own hurt, right? But these 600 men, they weren't typical. These were not typical because they were soldiers, but they were not soldiers in their hearts, in that they went into the caves of Rimmon and hid there 4 months. So now were asking if we should give them wives to a bunch of chickens who laid up in Ramon hiding in the dark. They can't break their oath and give them their daughters to wife. Where will these men of Benjamin find Hebrew women to marry and have children so that the tribe will not be totally annihilated? So now in the next few verses, Jabesh Gilead, Israelites placed such a premium on the unity of their tribes that they saw this city's non-cooperation in battle as worthy of widespread death. And the passage does not give God's approval to this destruction of men, women, and children. In fact, it's another of the bizarre actions of men when they do what is right in their own eyes, which is the point that both begins and ends this dark final section. Verse 8. And they said, what one is there of the tribes of Israel that came not up to Mizpah to the Lord? And behold, there came none to the camp from Jabesh Gilead to the assembly. Now wait a minute here. God's got some kind of a loophole going. Now when this big oath was made in Mizpah for all to join together, that no one came from Jabesh Gilead. So the Israelites conquered Jabesh Gilead, which did not help against the Benjamites, and gave 400 virgins from there to the tribe. So there's very little known of this Jabesh Gilead. They lived on the eastern side of the Jordan, and they were the only ones that did not come to fight against Gibeah. Verse 9, for the people were numbered, and behold, there were none of the inhabitants of Jabesh Gilead there. So they've rechecked the books, they rechecked the numbers, and sure enough, Jabesh Gilead was absent. So to know who did come up and who did not, and particularly to know whether the inhabitants of Jabesh Gilead did or did not, against whom the information was brought. And behold, there was none of the inhabitants of Jabesh Gilead there. Right? For as yet none that came returned home. All came to Shiloh first to pay their devotion to the Lord. And as none were found among the living, it didn't appear that they were among the slain. And very probably the muster roll was taken before they went to battle, and they were not on that muster roll. So it seems they had taken a census to see who was there, and there was no one from Jabesh Gilead there. Verse 10, and the congregation sent, is that for me? And the congregation sent there 12,000 men of the valiantest, and commanded them, saying, go and smite the inhabitants of Jabesh Gilead with the edge of the sword, with the women and the children. So that we're in the army, right? It is only 10,000. But Syriac and Arabic versions and Josephus agree with the Hebrew text that this place, according to some, to which this army was sent, was 52 miles from Shiloh. And I tend to agree. And he commanded them, saying, these were the orders they gave them when they marched out. Here's the order. Go and smite the inhabitants of Jabesh Gilead at the edge of the sword, with the women and the children, which it seems was indeed according to the oath they had made. Judges 21, verse 11. And this is the thing that you shall do. You shall utterly destroy every male and every woman that hath lain by man. So they gave them charge to execute, right? Without any reserve, young or old, married or unmarried, whether lawfully or unlawfully, in a married or unmarried state. There must have been a small group at Jabesh Gilead, because they sent 12,000 of their bravest men to kill them. And all the men were killed. And all the women who were not virgins were to be killed. Even the children were to be slain. So obviously, an effort to find wives for the 600 men of Benjamin that were left. It was also to fulfill the oath they had taken before God, which was to kill those who did not come to fight. Verse 12, and they found among the inhabitants of Jabesh Gilead 400 young virgins that had known no man by laying with any male. And they brought them into the camp to Shiloh, which is in the land of Canaan. So damsels that were virgins, whichever you want to say, that had no man, that they didn't have any relations with any male, which was judged by their age and by their unmarried state and by common report, unless it can be thought that they were examined. But how it was that they were not obligated, or didn't think of themselves obligated by their oath to put these to death as well as others, is not easy to say. Whether they thought the necessity of the case would excuse it, or that they had a dispensation from the Lord for it on consulting him, however so it happened. Right? They probably gone to Shiloh to seek help from God. So this group of 400 virgins is a start finding wives for the 600 Benjamites who remained alive because they didn't go fight. They hid out in the caves of Ramah. Probably with the Belial brothers. And the whole congregation sent some to speak to the children of Benjamin that were in the rock Ramon, and to call peaceably unto them. So they sent some of these damsels as messengers to call them and desire them to come to them, because they were still in the rock of Ramon, 600 men who hid themselves in a cave, of which the people of Israel were informed. And so to proclaim peace to them and assure them of it, and to let them know that they had no ill design against them, and that they might come safely to them and would be kindly received and protected. So Israel's trying to make peace with the remnant of 600 men of Benjamin who didn't want to fight. They didn't want to kill the Benjamites. Instead, they were trying to find them some wives so the tribe of Benjamin could live on. In verse 14, and Benjamin came again at that time, and they gave them wives which they had saved alive of the women of Jabesh Gilead, and yet so they sufficed them not. 600 Benjamites returned with the messengers at the same time to the people of Israel, and they were putting confidence in the assurances that they had given them of peace and safety. And they gave them wives from the women, the virgins of Jabesh Gilead, and in doing which they supposed they had not violated their oath, since, though they had sworn that they would not give their own daughters, they had not sworn they would not give the daughters of others. And besides, as the men of Jabesh Gilead were not at Mizpah when the oath was made, they didn't take one. And so their daughters might be given in marriage to the Benjamites outside of that oath. So there were not wives enough for them all, for they were 600 men, whereas the daughters of the inhabitants of Jabesh Gilead were 400. So that there were 200 more needed. And gives the sense that it was not a point of justice and judgment to do this to the daughters of Jabesh Gilead, namely to save and give them in marriage, but they did this because of the people repented for Benjamin as follows. We see that there were not enough of these virgins for 600 men of Benjamin sufficed in this verse is speaking of being enough, and they were 200 women short, not to make a pun here. Verse 15 says, and the people repented for Benjamin, because that the Lord had made a breach in the tribes of Israel. So that they had destroyed all their women, and that they had saved no more of the daughters of Jabesh Gilead, not a sufficient number to be wives to the Benjamites, because the Lord had made a breach in the tribes of Israel by almost destroying one of the tribes. For even though this was done by the Israelites, yet by permission and according to the will of God and through his overruling providence. Right? So the people here are speaking to the Israelites. The Lord had caused a division among Benjamin and the other tribes. So all of the other tribes were wanting the tribe of Benjamin to again be a part of the 12 tribes. Verse 16. Then the elders of the congregation said, how shall we do for wives for them that remaineth, seeing the women are destroyed out of Benjamin? So having recognized that 200 others needed wives, they decided to allow them to snatch brides on their own at a dance in Shiloh, not believing this violated their oath of not directly giving their daughters. So they're trying to think of some way for the other 200 men of Benjamin to have wives. They don't want the tribe of Benjamin to stop existing. You know, they would give their daughters to the Benjamites were it not for the oath that they had taken. Verse 17 says, and they said there must be an inheritance for them that escape of Benjamin, that a tribe be not destroyed out of Israel. So the escaped are 600 men in the rock of Rimmon. 400 of them were supplied with wives, and the other 200 needed wives. And as there was an inheritance divided by lot to the tribe of Benjamin, to that tribe and that only it belonged, and they must have it and no other. It now of right devolved on these 600 men, and them only. Therefore, the provision must be made to increase their number, that they can occupy the inheritance they have a right to do, rebuild their cities, to till their land, to cultivate their vineyards, and enjoy all the advantages of their possessions. There must be descendants for Benjamin. Verse 18. Howbeit, we may not give them wives of our daughters, for the children of Israel have sworn, saying, cursed be he that giveth a wife to Benjamin. Though their case was very necessary and desperate, I guess you could say that, for the children of Israel have sworn, and they said, going to be cursed if you give a wife to Benjamin. They were in a tight fix. So if they broke their oath, they made to God at mitzvah that they would be cursed of God. Now verse 19. Then they said, behold, there is a feast of the Lord in Shiloh yearly, in a place which is on the north side of Bethel, on the east side of the highway that goeth up from Bethel to Shechem, and on the south of Lebohah. Shiloh, which was so known a place that it was frivolous to describe it by such circumstances, even by places much less known than itself. A feast, which as to that part or exercise of the feast, especially concerned and mentioned, meaning the dancing of the virgins, was not celebrated in Shiloh, but in a neighboring place more convenient for that one purpose. So, on the three solemn feasts in which they used some honest and holy recreations, among them dancing was one, Exodus 15:20, and probably it was the Feast of Tabernacles, which they did celebrate with more than ordinary joy. Right? So without going to every section here, let's see what's going on. Therefore they commanded, verse 20, therefore they commanded the children of Benjamin, saying, go and lie in wait in the vineyards. So the 200 men of the tribe that wanted wives, they ordered them as follows, and which they spake with authority, being the elders of the congregation, or so they said. Go wait in the vineyard, which might belong to Shiloh, or it may be to Lebanon, which perhaps is the same with Beth Laban, famous for its wine. Now, I suspect that Beth Rimmah is the same with Beth Rimmon, near which was the Rock of Ramon, right there close. Now, these men that's where they were hiding at. Now, this being the time of the year when the vintage was just over with, the vines were full of branches and leaves, under which the men might be the better to hide themselves, and the grapes being gathered, there was no more men in the vineyard, so it might lie in wait safely and under cover. Made a pun. They could wait and hide under cover. Verse 21. And see and behold, if the daughters of Shiloh come out to dance in dances, then come ye out of the vineyards, and catch you every man his wife of the daughters of Shiloh, and go to the land of Benjamin. So this is the thing that they should do, except I'm thinking about that 199th man catching the last woman. You know, I might be working real hard to be up in the early stages of that. At any rate, just like every other festival, this is how it was to be. The virgins used to dance at this time.
were to watch and observe when they came out of the city there and were engaged in such an exercise. And so the men were supposed to come out and snatch a woman. Each man one woman, not more. Naughty, naughty little boy. And go off directly with them to their own tribe. Now, the Jewish maidens, you remember, they danced at the Feast of Tabernacles. So some of the scholars and theologians believe this to be that feast, that they would kidnap themselves wives and take them home with them to the land of Benjamin. So this was a prepared encounter, and the fathers could not give their daughters to them without being cursed. And the Benjamites seemed to be the lucky ones, as they could kidnap the woman of their dreams and not be cursed. Verse 22. And it shall be when their fathers or their brethren come unto us to complain, that we will say to them, Be favorable unto them for our sakes, because we reserve not to each man his wife in the war, for you did not give unto them at this time that you should be guilty. So, of this rape of the daughters or the sisters, or to bring an action against them, and desire they might be summoned before them, the elders of the people, and be tried and judged according to the law for what they had done by snatching somebody, or put them upon going to war with them again for such a treatment. Right? So, verse 23. And the children of Benjamin did so, and took them wives according to their number of them that danced, whom they caught, and they went and returned to their inheritance, and repaired the cities and dwelt in them. So they went and laid wait in the vineyards, and when the daughters of Shiloh came out to dance, they rushed on them, and took them wives according to their number, 200 of them, each man a wife and no more. Right? For though polygamy was in use in those times, and if at any time necessary and could be excused, it might be seem so now. Yet it was not indulged in, neither by the elders or the children of Benjamin. Right? Of them that danced, whom they caught. So the rape of the Sabine virgins by Romulus at the arena, plays and shows mentioned by various theologians, and the carrying off of 15 Spartan virgins from the dances are sometimes observed as parallel cases to this, and justified by it, particularly that of Romulus. Right? Verse 24.
And the children of Israel departed thence at that time, every man to his tribe and to his family, and they went out from thence, every man to his inheritance. And aren't we glad this is over? So the war being ended, and everything settled as well as circumstances would admit, for the preservation of the tribe of Benjamin, who was the cause of it, remember, and had suffered so much in it, the Israelites had met in Mizpah, not fallen in the war, returned their respective countries to their wives and children and the businesses of their calling. They divided by lot to them to their estates and possessions, which each had a right to. And so after the feast, the families of all the tribes went home and lived happily ever after. Verse 25. So in those days there was no king in Israel. Every man did that which was right in his own eyes. Not again. You can't tell me this is going to happen again. This is the same way we've been starting and ending these things. Because why? Because there is something God is trying to hammer home. No king. And every man did the Luciferian doctrine, which is he did that which was right in his own eyes. So here we go again. What is chapter 22 going to bring? Now what? I mean, if it doesn't seem bad enough that these 600 chicken soldiers got a chance to come tiptoeing through the vineyards and pick themselves a woman of Shiloh to bring home as their new mama. Hello? So everybody's taken care of, everybody's happy. Except for verse 25. In those days there was no king in Israel. God's trying to hammer it home to us. It's not a president, a vice president, it's none of that. It's a king. And brothers and sisters and ladies and gentlemen, we have a king who is the King of Kings. And we need a Lord. And he is the Lord of Lords. He's the first and the last. He's the shepherd, the bright and morning star. He's the everlasting one. He's the good shepherd, the only begotten Son. And his name is Jesus. We must understand that Christ is our King. And because we have a King in the congregation, we are not a part of the Luciferian doctrine, which is an absolute lie that says you can go out every man and do what is right in his own eyes. That is incorrect. What we've seen vividly demonstrates how bizarre and deep sin can become when people throw off the authority God has mediated to the king. Because we don't have a king. Are you paying attention, America? Well, you better be. Talk about the chickens coming home to roost. Ah, go ahead with your Luciferian doctrine. You're going to find yourself in a world of mess.
Our struggle is not
Because you didn't pay attention to the Word of God.
It's against the powers of this dark world.
Even by true
Therefore, put on the full armor
illustration.
so you can stand your ground.
I'm a soldier in the army of the Lord. I'm a soldier in the army of the Lord. I'm a soldier in the army of the Lord. I'm a soldier in the army. I got my war clothes on.
Well,
In the army of the Lord. I got my war clothes on.
the crazy old man is at it again.
I got my war clothes on.
I'm going to stand and hold until relieved. Has nothing to do whether you like it or not. But the truth is the truth.
Breastplate on. I got my helmet on. In the army. I got my sword and shield. His truth is marching on. Let's get on.
There it is. Until tomorrow, same time, same gospel channel. We'll find out what's next. I see you. Peace out.